So you're thinking of buying a bike for your child? Well, that's great news, but before you hit buy, watch this video because I'm going to save you time, I'm going to save you money, and I'm going to make sure you make the right choice. So without any further ado, let's get into this. So the first thing to talk about is size. Yeah, size matters when it comes to picking a bike, especially with children's bikes, because children come in such a range of sizes, as we all know. There is a huge range of different sizes in bikes, but it's not just the frame with a child's bike, it's the wheel size. Take this as a rule of thumb. A 16-inch wheel size is okay for a 4 to 6-year-old. A 20-inch wheel size is good for a 5 to 8-year-old. A 24-inch wheel size is good for a 7 to 11-year-old. And then a 26-inch wheel size is normally good from 11 and upwards. Then you get onto your 29-inch, which is pretty much adult size. So the best thing to do is actually just measure your child and see if the manufacturer has a recommended height limit for their bikes, and then you'll be able to fit them into that matrix somewhere. Suspension, be super careful. Manufacturers know that when most people are looking for especially a mountain bike, they want suspension on it. So the cheaper bikes, the kids' bikes, they'll put something on that looks like it's suspension, but really isn't. Actually, in fact, it's a hindrance and it's dangerous. So make sure you're getting a bike with decent suspension on if you're getting it. Now, there is a hardtail, which just has suspension up front, and then there's full suspension, which has suspension front and back. But I would say if you're getting a kid's bike or a budget bike, don't go for full suspension. 9 times out of 10, probably even 100% of the time, it's going to be terrible. It's going to be a hindrance. You need to be spending big bucks to get a decent full suspension bike. If you're getting a bike for, say, a toddler or a young primary school age child who's only going around the local park, they don't need suspension. Get them a bike without suspension. The benefit of getting them a bike without suspension means you will get more for your money. Less of the money will be going into the suspension on the bike, and more will go into things like the brakes, potentially gears if it's needed, that kind of thing. But if your child is getting more independent, going off-road, using the bike on the trails, then they probably do need suspension. And I will just reiterate, make sure you get good suspension. Ask questions when you're buying the bike. Make sure the sales advisor knows what they're talking about. Do your due diligence and make sure you read reviews. And I'll get into a little tip to help you make sure you get good suspension in a moment. Gears. Now, a kid in most cases doesn't need 21 gears, and gears can get really convoluted because there's lots of different configurations, arrangements and so on. But what I would say is if you've got a young primary school aged child, a toddler, they don't need gears. If they're just going around the local park, then a single speed will do just fine. Don't waste your money on that. However, if they are getting more adventurous, they're going off-road, then they do need gears. And actually, I know I just said you don't need 21 gears, but really, the more gears, the better. If you get a bike with very few gears on it, so let's just use a one-by for example. A one-by is a bike that doesn't have a shifter up front, it's only got a rear derailleur, so you've only got one gear lever. So say if you get them something that has like 6 gears on it. I mean, that's okay maybe in some instances to get you started, but they're going to run out of gears pretty quickly when climbing uphill. It's not going to be fun. For me, the sweet spot would be somewhere between 8 and 10 gears. They do on a one-by derailleur system, they do go all the way up to 12 speed, 12 gears. But that's overkill. That really is overkill. But hey, if you're willing to spend the money, they will love you for it. But yeah, don't go less than 8 gears, I would say, as a rule of thumb. That's just my opinion. Opinions may vary. Leave a comment down below if you disagree. Brakes. Brakes are incredibly important. You don't want to be sending your child out on a bike that doesn't have decent brakes on it. Again, it's all proportionate, but let's just stick to your child who's getting more adventurous, getting out and about. The likelihood is, even if they're not riding on the road, they're going to be riding near the road, near cars, they're going to be coming near people. If you have a bike and the brakes don't work, then quite frankly, it's dangerous. What I will say is there's 2 types of brakes in use at the moment. There's the old-fashioned V-brakes, the rim brakes, which are perfectly fine for most uses, for most children. And I would argue, even for your more adventurous children who are going off-road, a decent set of V-brakes will work just fine. And there are disc brakes, which are arguably slightly more powerful in most cases. Weight. Now, children's bikes can be ridiculously heavy. If you've ever picked up a kid's bike, it's shocking how heavy they make some of them. As a rule of thumb, a child's bike should not weigh more than 40% of the child's weight. So say if the child weighs 30 kilograms, then the bike shouldn't weigh more than 12 kilograms. That's just as a rule of thumb. Don't stick to that too religiously, but it just gives you an idea, just something to be mindful of. Check the weight of the bike that you're buying. So I said earlier, I was going to give you some recommendations to make sure you get decent components, so decent suspension, brakes. And the best thing to do is stick to known brands. They're more likely not to have absolutely terrible components on. If it's just a brand you've never heard of, a total no-name, and you don't know a huge deal about bikes, then my suggestion would be steer clear. So there are budget brands like Decathlon, also known as Rock Rider, Frog, Woom, Voodoo, Specialized as well in some cases, so you're getting onto the slightly more higher end there. But those are all brands worth some investigation, but do your own due diligence, do your own research, because getting this right first time will save you money and give you peace of mind that your child's going to be safe on that bike. One thing to say is it's very tempting for some people, especially if you don't ride a bike yourself, to consider your child's bike as a toy. That's probably one of the worst attitudes you can have towards buying a child a bike. What I want you not to do is walk into the supermarket and buy the cheapest bike off the shelf. These bikes are liable to fall apart, bits drop off them, and therefore literally wheels come off. I'm not exaggerating, I've seen it with my own eyes, these cheap bikes shaking themselves to pieces. In fact, some of the cheap bikes that look like mountain bikes actually come with disclaimers saying don't ride this off-road. They're only sold to look like them and intended to be used around the park. That's how bad it can be. So if you want your child to be safe, you need to, unfortunately, spend a little bit of money. Now, I hate bike snobbery. I think you can get into this hobby without spending thousands and thousands of pounds. But when it comes to buying, say, a capable child's bike, I would say you shouldn't be spending less than £300. And even then, when you're spending £300, you need to be super careful, because at that price range, you can still get some real terrible bikes. I mean, ideally, you want to be spending somewhere around about £500, in my opinion, in the current market. Some people are going to find this crazy, totally disagree with me. I welcome the challenges. Stick your comments down below. If you want your child to be safe, have some chance of having decent brakes, decent gears, decent suspension, then that's the price range you should be looking at. At the end of the day, a child's more than capable of reaching, some pretty terrifying speeds on a mountain bike, especially when they get more confident. And the last thing you want is the wheel falling off when they're doing it. And trust me, I've seen it with my own eyes. It does happen on the cheaper bikes. And on expensive ones as well, if you don't check them over. Now, if you really want to save money, a great option is to go second hand. What I would say with second hand is you need to know what you're doing. You need to check for rust, you need to be checking the brakes work properly, you need to be checking the gears are indexing. And also as well, there's things you could potentially miss, like the wheels slightly out of alignment, bent. Also, if you're buying a second-hand bike that used to be very expensive a few years ago, and you're now getting a great deal for it, if the components are worn out on it, then potentially you're leading yourself into another huge cost when it comes to replacing those components, because expensive bikes have expensive components. So just be very wary when buying secondhand. And finally, this bit is non-negotiable. If you are buying your child a bike, you need to get them a helmet. Do not send your kid out without a helmet on. Helmets can be pricey themselves. Don't buy them a cheap, uncertified helmet. Get them a proper helmet, because at the end of the day, it could save their lives. To summarize, don't just buy the cheapest supermarket bike that you can. Make sure the bike fits, it's the correct size. Make sure you're considering the components, and make sure you're considering what your child is using the bike for. And again, to reiterate, make sure you buy them a helmet as well. So thank you very much for watching. If you found this useful, leave a like and comment. I try to make all my videos useful, whether I'm going on a bike tour or whether I'm reviewing a product or just doing a video like this. For me, it's not about the views, it's whether the content's useful. So I'd just like to say thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one. All right, thanks very much. Bye-bye.